It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to this panel. I'm delighted and privileged to be here at this panel because basically I feel that the events that have taken place in the last year and a half, as well as the issues that we're going to discuss in this panel, are going to be highly pertinent to many of the issues that the conference will be talking about. So it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about the panel. As you see from the title and from the abstract, if you had a chance to look at it, we are going to look at the digital issues. And more specifically, we're going to look at the digital skill development issues. So this panel is made up of 3 contributors, Dr. Yussra Jamjoom from Jeddah, and Dr. Yousuf Balushi from Muscat, as well as myself, are conducting this panel. So in the usual sense of housekeeping, if there are questions and queries, we'll be looking forward to receiving them through the system. And I shall mention that we will be discussing a number of related issues. So we'll very much look forward to feedback from colleagues in due course. All the 3 panel members are on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to hear from audiences in due course. So if I take a moment now to try and open up the slides that we have for this presentation, and then we can move from there onward. Great. So as you see, we're hoping to look at the demand and supply issues, and we essentially are going to look at the policy interventions that the Gulf labor market will be looking at and will be tackling. So we've got a couple of key terms there, and the key terms being post-pandemic era, as well as the Gulf, and I'll give you a brief definition about the Gulf in a minute. What we're really thinking about and talking about, what we've been looking at, as you see from the case vignettes, is not only GCC 6, so the 6 GCC nations, but also Iraq and Iran as well. So geographically, all the countries that share the Gulf region. So moving along, this is our roadmap and our arguments and themes. I am hoping to talk in about 25 minutes or so, and I hope that I could cover a number of interrelated issues, both to do with practice-based as well as to do with policy intervention. So as you see from the slide, we're hoping to have an overview that looks at the context and the argument that we're making, the argument being that the Gulf states and the digitalization of the labor market is best served by taking an interdisciplinary approach. And then the way we have structured this presentation is essentially to 3 processes of analysis, which I have a look at the studies. And I should mention here, essentially what we're going to look at today are the 3 or 4 countries. So partly we'll be looking at Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. We'll have a case study of Oman, and we'll make some references to Iran. So that would be the analysis. And then we'll try and do some interpretation and think about the policy interventions, as you see there. So issues to do with actually nationals and expatriates, the segmented labor market, and private and public sector. And then within that, within interpreting the issues, we'll be looking at the migrant labor supply and upskilling to the different interventions. And then hopefully we'll come to some sort of a pragmatic integration by looking at the policy levers and implication ahead. I will then, after about 25 minutes to 30 minutes, pass over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Yousuf, and he will expand on Oman's case study for about 25 minutes too. And then after that, we will come back together and we will conclude with some concluding comments really around policy methods and interventions, such as the different frames of strategic incrementalism or mixed scanning, and looking at really challenges of utilizing the policy windows that have now come about because of COVID-19 and because of the relative low prices of the energy. So we will, at some point, if you get a chance, have a look at some actual tools such as impact evaluation, cost-benefit analysis, and objective-based evaluations. So let me just give you my first argument now, here and now in the first few minutes. And basically, what this is partly from me, but colleagues would some way agree with me, is that the Gulf states the policies have tended to overanalyze the issues and underinterpret the situation. So in the future, we would hope that we look for a balance and a better balance for the need to reach integration. So what are we talking about and where are we? What are we looking at? What you will see here is not new if you followed the policy domains in many different countries, United States, United Kingdom, as well as European Union. You see that digital skills are very much topical, and digital skills are seen as essential for the changing nature of the economy. So upskilling and reskilling are the keywords here. And the impact of digitalization on the labor market is gradually leading to basically three trends, and I'll put those there. Either positions and jobs emerge and new ones are created, or they evolve slowly, or in some ways they're unchanged, or rather the last point, which has very much been covered by the kind of press and public media, is about declining roles, it's about the churn, about jobs changing hands. So here's a few covers of popular magazines and analytical, journalistic publications such as The Economist, and they talk about the technology, the effect of technology, the effects of lifelong learning, the effects of changes in universities. And in the very last little box you see, it's part of a recent study from last year, Innovating Through Technology in the GCC. So the reason I raise this is basically because there's a key underlying issue here about innovation. And then next one, then you see a whole range of other reports also from academia, as well as many global consulting companies. And no need for me to read too many of them, but you'll see, again, global trends and issues to do with automation, fourth industrial revolution, AI, machine learning, all affecting what is skill shift. And again, going specific, and this is a kind of a reminder for me, the report that you see that looked at Digital Middle East, the one that we kind of used as a starting position, was October 2016. What really our time span is the last 5 years within the region. And the argument here is basically that the region can do better, that the region, as you see from the top of the right-hand side, the Middle East is only capturing a fraction of its digital potentials. Moving steadily now to other reports, we're in kind of the analytical phase, the analysis bit of our review. I quite like these two reports, and one is from Deloitte from 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago, 2017, and the other one is from RTB Little, again, consultancies, quite recently, the last 2 months ago, and both, as you know, are sponsored by Huawei, the manufacturer. So this slide that you see is a summary of what has been happening, basically, the linkage between digital issues and the GCC national visions in the 6 GCC nations. So that's Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. And my colleagues will update these because, as you see, this is from a 2017 report. Therefore, some of the national visions have now led to the new one. So they've actually run out and other things have happened. For example, Oman vision is now 2040, as well as the new visions that UAE is looking at. But essentially, I draw your attention to the last line, which basically says, within the national plans and the national visions, what role does the ICT and digital programs play? And as you see, it's part and parcel of all of these things. This segment for the next 2 or 3 slides, you see, is from the recent ADL, that's RTB Little report in the last 2 months. And they invoke an interesting metaphor of policy archetypes. Now, I've added bits to it. And so actually, we may in fact be talking about prototypes and not archetypes. What they're saying is, in essence, think about where does your country want to go? And look at the 7 boxes at the top. Where do you want to be? Do you want to become an innovation hub all the way across to an ICT patron? And they have come up with these issues. It's got nice at the top, the arrows you see. Where do you lie in terms of your activities? I'm giving examples from, for example, from UAE and Singapore in the trade bits, looking at about 10 to 20% of the GDP coming from this, or looking right at the very top, being a technology leader, places like China and South Korea, Germany and Japan. And at the very end, ICT novices, what they've said, which examples such as Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Now, I have issues with these that I'm going to come back to, so please bear with me as I kind of go through it. it does have interesting points that it highlights, like many other reports and think tank and academic projects that have been carried out. But if I go further, you see the dimensions that they're looking at, and these are bits that I would like to, in some ways, expand on in a minute. So as well as technology and ecosystem, they try to articulate the issues about capabilities. They try to articulate how can we think about skill development? How can we think about actually the numbers of people who are engaged in the country and increase those numbers? So the box on the right-hand side is meant to be an example of Oman's policy areas, indicators, and challenges, and what is it that they can do better. We'll return to this as we're looking at Oman as a case study. But my key point here is actually think about capabilities that need to be looked at. So again, here we come back to the innovation. This is from the RTD Little report, and what they're saying is that we need to have all these things for sure: digital infrastructure, increased R&D, regulatory leadership, but also what we need is ICT skills and capabilities. And that's in fact what we are going to say a little bit more on and focus on that. And I won't read through the slides because this is clearly easier for you to do so, but a whole range of issues to really think about increasing capabilities in order to be able to participate in the emerging economy. Now, let me pause for a minute and change gear. And here I pose a question, and you'll probably all come across these, the cave-shaped recovery. So looking at the different shapes of the economy after the hopefully post-pandemic era coming to reach us soon. And one of the things that's been mentioned, one of the models that's been mentioned is the K-shaped recovery. And I do not have any clear indications from data as of now. I'll be very happy to hear from people if they do, specifically about the recovery patterns within the GCC countries. But as I pose the question there, we don't as yet, still where we are not clear about what recovery pattern will look like. And also, will we have a stalling of the growth, as well as will we potentially have labor market stalling? And we left those as open questions. So let me come back here and just really tell you a little bit about what is this, where are we going from? We've identified 3 regional megatrends, and these megatrends actually come up from our own informal case studies and vignettes within our own informal research network partners. So these, as you see up there, definitely we see drives from all these countries. And I should add here, Iran and Iraq are included. And these 3 patterns are, we see economic efforts towards economic or sectoral diversification and looking for stability, particularly looking at some of the evidence of state-owned enterprises going towards sectoral smart specialization. I'll come back to this later. We also see technological catch-up and development. We see potentials and potential discussions around leapfrogging potential. How could we use technologies in order to move and develop faster? And then the emergence of producer and consumer city hubs. And that's a really interesting concept that's been going around for a long time within different fields. And recently, actually in the last few months, Mehran Kamravar mentioned this in a paper for Middle East Journal. And what Professor Kamravar was talking about is looking at different cities within the region. And are we just, the cities that are coming along as hub cities, are we just consuming, in this sense, the technology, or are we actually participating and producing too? And my argument later would be that actually we may in fact be somewhere in the middle. Some cities or some sectors within cities could be prosumers, so producers who also consume. And the last point here, which we'll be focusing on a lot more, is to do with labor market restructuring, sustainable job creation, as I've just asked, issues to do with the recovery and issues to do with low energy prices have put a lot of tremendous pressure. I think it was the World Bank who called it a kind of a double impact for the region. So low energy prices as well as the economic effects of COVID-19. And looking for a country such as Iran, for example, then you had the triple impact, because you had the continuation and increasing of the sanctions, the US sanctions and global sanctions problems related to that, as well as the COVID-19 and the energy crisis. So as I started to say in the beginning, this is a really opportune time to think about crisis. Let me just come back very briefly here, having gone through it. It's also interesting for us to look at the city level, because as you see, there's a map of UAE there. I'll be using UAE and I'll be mentioning UAE definitely is considered as the hub in the region. But UAE itself is considered, as you can see, there are multiple emirates in there at multiple levels of development. So we're talking about Dubai, which probably be the gold standard in terms of digital activities. Then Abu Dhabi quite quickly catching up, and then some of the northern emirates, which may well be at very different stages of development. So I've got a couple of slides here which are actually to do with the expatriate population and percentages. Please bear with these, although I realize, and questions could well be coming, that these data are not up to date. There has been an exodus, so-called exodus, of people leaving the region. Now, my data doesn't indicate an exodus. It indicates people coming and going, but I could well be out of date with this. Definitely, I know that the figure, and I know colleagues from Oman would say that may not be up to date anymore, and some of the other countries, but the trends, I would argue, are still pretty much as they are. And as you can see, right at the top, the Qatari population, something like 10% of the population there, and the Emirati being like 20%, meaning the nationals. And I just wanted to draw some similarities. And if you look at the bottom slide, you'll see that places like Canada, which are looked at as a magnet for migrant workers, they, basically they go up to about 20%. So the position in GCC countries is in fact unique of having such a large portion of non-nationals. And this is, again, figures are from 2018, so they would not be up to date. This is looking at United Arab Emirates. There may well be more different and more in terms of numbers. For example, the Chinese population probably is much more than what it is there from 3.5 years ago, and there could well be a significant number of Syrians. Now, that aside, the nationalities, as you see again, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Philippines. And I'll come to very briefly look at the same type of population breakdown in Saudi Arabia. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is basically it'd be interesting to see where are people coming from, what are their skill background, because very soon I'm going to get to that, and how is it that they can contribute to the digital economy development of the GCC countries. So let me push forward with like glances, really quick glances. So this is an emerging ecosystem of digital activities, digital sectors from the UAE. This is mainly, if I may say, a combination of Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So as you might have been following, there's a vibrant music industry, performing arts, publishing. There's some technology and innovation, R&D, the mission to Mars, I'm sure you've been following, as well as studios and films, as well as some game development in Abu Dhabi being the hub for the film productions. Then there's some records and data here about Abu Dhabi, how Abu Dhabi since 14 and 15 has turned its attention towards this digital economy and how they're trying to create clusters for it. Now, let me pause for a moment here, and I'm going to try and use a metaphor. Having studied in London and having spent quite a long time in the different kind of cities as day trippers, one of the things we used to do, I used to do as a graduate student in London, was to take a trip out to cities around London. And one of the cities is called Bath. And what I like to do is to use this metaphor with the next point that I'm coming along. If you go to Bath, Bath, named after the Roman Bath, a beautiful English city in the Somerset region, you have a central church there. It's called the Bath Abbey. And it's a historical church. And within that church, if you look at the west side, if you look at the front face of it, you see two columns carved in stone going up, which are representing Jacob's ladder, basically, representing ladders, the kind of biblical as well as Quranic references to Prophet Jacob, of how people go up. And what I like to put as a metaphor to use that in the last 20 years, probably 25 to 30 years in Iran, 20 years in GCC, we've been running a metaphor of learning and higher education equals earning and better jobs. And this is a metaphor that one of our old professors used to use back in UK. And I think it's an interesting one because what you see in the picture of the left-hand side, you see angels going up the ladder, going up Jacob's ladder. And this is more or less what we were promising to the locals, to the nationals in the Gulf countries. You study, you educate yourself at the secondary school level and then at the university level. The expansion of the university level meant that you go up and you become a graduate. And that's going to lead to a better life, to a more secure job, and ultimately to virtues. Now, it was an interesting story, and it was a representation of a global call that came from the United States and from Western Europe, maybe about 10 years before that, so about 35 to 30 years ago. And this is basically the fallacy of credentialism. And what it meant was you go up the ladder, you try and recruit and you try and gain diplomas, what the Koreans call diploma disease. But essentially, it doesn't really matter much because it's not what the job market is now currently looking for. So as you see the angels going up, some of the angels are actually falling off the ladder. Now, in this case, the metaphor, they've sinned. But in our job market and in our labor market, it means that those skills are no longer wanted by the labor market. So let us think about the priorities. And I'm going to take really specifically, bear that metaphor in mind in terms of the ladders, and I'll return to it. Investment in terms of digital skills. If it matters, we need to see how it links in. Where does it link in? Where is it actually kind of contributing to the labor market? I won't read through the labors, it's there, but essentially we need to think about investing in digital skills for work, for better alignment of education to labor market needs, for thinking about the school to work, and here school also could mean university to work transition, and for promoting international skills within the region. And the point that you see, the triangle on the side, on the right-hand side, you see there needs to be a ladder here. The ladder is up in terms of value creation. Going up the ladder, we need to have skills. Now, be it basic digital skills, intermediate or advanced, etc. And then the two arrows at the bottom are trying to say, well, what we need to do is we need to think about improving the quality of the workplace skills so we can contribute to sectoral growth, and then really thinking within the Gulf region about industrial policies and about how the supply and demand could be matched there. So I'll pause a moment here before moving forward. Great. So let's think. We're thinking about, let's kind of get down and practical about it. We're thinking about the GCT. You've seen the populations. We know the locals, and we know there are, like any system, there are people who are already in the system. There are people already who are in the schools, in the high schools, in universities, and potentially in the job markets. And what this typology tries to do, it tries to say, well, actually, the digital skills, it's partly based on work from OECD from 2013. It says, well, we need to look at sectors. We need to look at, see which sectors are given as priority and what's happening there. What are the early reactive interventions that we can actually think about? What can we do? How can we provide training and requalification for low-level or medium-level demands? And we also need to think about the people already in the system, so ongoing proactive interventions, thinking about emergence of the work skills that's coming. Essentially, issues not just at the university level, but TVET, technical, vocational education and training, and what we see here, using migrant labor. So migrant labor policies, particularly for perhaps medium to higher level demands. And the last point there, hopefully thinking about future workers' skills. So this is some kind of a mapping exercise to let us recall, basically, that we need to bear these things in mind. Now, this is kind of my heaviest slide, if you like, in terms of the kind of core issues. And I won't read it out, but all I say is what we have found is that when we take an interdisciplinary grasp, when we combine insights from, in this case, combining insights from Schumpeterian thinking, economic geography, and comparative policy studies, we start to see some interesting trends. And we start to see, well, we definitely need to think about both theory and practice, research within academia and within consultancies, and we need to try and think very carefully about co-creation. And by co-creation, what I mean is basically we need to talk to and talk about the issue with different kinds of people. Now, I've left some methodological issues. Be very interesting to find. I haven't managed to do. Very glad if colleagues have. Please do let me know. Longitudinal glances, longitudinal studies. There are very few longitudinal research looking at 5 or 10-year windows within the region. My key point there, policy borrowing, looking at think tank and consultancy report. We need to be quite careful about and nuanced about policy borrowing and about the learning needs. There is a need for disaggregation of data. I've already mentioned the issues, really interesting that maybe we're going away from national level, where maybe we are really within the digital sector. We're talking about emerging hub cities, cities as producers and consumers, or prosumers, producer consumers in different sectors. And then thinking about something that I'd hoped that I would touch on more, but perhaps not in this point in time. Digital entrepreneurship could well be, and this is state-sponsored digital entrepreneurship, right? Governments within the region saying, well, why don't you think about opening up a startup? That is seen as a graduate destination. And as that moves forward, leads to innovation and could well lead to a changing skill pattern and interesting motivation for the nationals to be involved with. Just put this here, economic diversification we worked on, and colleagues have actually written about this extensively. We may, in fact, for the sectoral issues such as digital issues and digital sector, we may be thinking about specialization, not really diversification. And our model, essentially, we're working on a model, and we have, as I've mentioned, the partners in the different cities, is really to think about upstream economy and work. How is the work changing? How has the work changed in the last year due to pandemic? How is it changing due to the way that we're now extensively using technology instead of, and also as the downstream education and training. So we don't see it as valuable just to look at education and training, but to see the relationships. And my last point here is a kind of really evocative concept. So learning economy perhaps is an interesting, more definitional, interesting in terms of its capabilities to provide us with kind of answers. And the definition here is, nice point, capability to learn. So this is referring to the population, right? Capability to learn and also to forget in order to learn new skills, linking with lifelong learning. And that's from B.A. Lundvall, a economist from Denmark some years back. Interesting concept. So what are we saying? What am I saying in the contribution up to now? Well, we need to think about a three-way process. And that three-way, we need to take account of what is happening within the region. So the migrants, that is expatriate labor force, which percentage of them are we assessing and are we going to bring into this drive of industrial policy towards digital economy? If that's the case, we need to have some audits of knowing where they are, where they're coming from, what is their characteristics and features. Now, my suspicion is here that we will find a lot of the expatriate communities not being at the middle or higher level. Some will, but a very large number may well be at the lower to lower middle level of digital skills. Second point here, stating the obvious in some ways, attention needs to be paid to the educated population, that's the national populations that have a digital skill gap. And what I mean here is, well, let's not forget about all the people who are there already at workplace. The concept of lifelong learning means lifelong learning, right? So essentially, if somebody joins workplace at 25, they still have, and we need to provide learning and development mechanisms for them to go ahead and be able to keep up to date with digital skills. And then lastly, really thinking about remedial focus of mismatching, this ongoing issue, the story that's been going on for many years within the region about education and job market or labor market not aligned. And this is a call for our third member of the panel, which is a very interesting one. And what Dr. Yussra would say is basically we need to pay a lot more attention to our young ladies, the young women in the societies, GCC6, Iraq, Kurdistan, Kurdish Iraq, as well as Iran. They are in many ways empowering the changes in the labor market. So we need to also think about their potentials for the digital sector. I'm going to try and finish with here, this segment of the talk before I pass over to Dr. Yousuf with two orienting quotes, and we will come back and discuss this. And first one is from, as you see there, is essentially from a Singaporean politician. And the reason I use Singapore is over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been lots of interesting attempts to try and compare Singapore with some of the GCC countries. Now, my own personal view is that comparison is not going to be fruitful. There's no harm in doing comparative policy analysis with anyone. But key points that we need to bear in mind, how similar are their cases and how different they are. Now, bear that in mind, and be that as it may, Singapore has some of the most similar demographics, with having something like a third of its population as migrants. And the key point that comes across there from Mr. Keith is basically this cannot go on, right? And this was in 2019. The context is that they did have an election coming up. So the issue that they're talking about and the bits that are put in bold is like, we need to think about the relationship, about the inflow of migrants and how it links in with our population. And my second one is a bit older now. It's from a former US State Department employee. And kind of very simply, he was talking about military interventions within the region. But essentially, it's about strategy and capabilities and capacity. And I think it's a paraphrase of Napoleon. I think Napoleon in the old days used to talk about amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk about supply chain, etc. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to my colleague and co-presenter who will continue and tell us a bit more about the Oman case study. And before I do so, actually, bear in mind that Oman will represent a very interesting case here, because out of the GCC 6, you saw that Oman is one that actually has a small population, but also has tried to keep a relatively low number of expatriates. Over to you.
Yes, shall I start, Dr. Náder?
Thank you, please do.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like really to thank you all for, being here. And it's a really great pleasure for us to talk about digitalizations and Oman case. And by the way, I mean, whatever is relevant to Oman is relevant to other GCC country. All those country, as you all know, moved to modern states, I mean, in the last 50 years. And my presentation, I'll focus in 2 to 3 elements. First, I'll talk how that transformation is essential and important for those GCC country, and what is needed. It's not moving the screen. Can we? Yes. Okay, proceed, please, proceed. So Oman, as other GCC, is really a success story. So we can see that those countries all start maybe at the same, talking about particularly the modern states start from early 70s, which is, really after discovery of the oil and help the GCC country to pump enough capital to build the infrastructures and really a modern state component, and that is continue. And most of the GCC really grow with a very high growth rate. I mean, talking here about 7 to 8%, because those states honestly start from scratch, we can say, early 70s. The second stage, which is also talking about the stage which is from 1995 to 2020, there is a more of development or improvement on those states, particularly to have a better legal framework, human capital improvement, and also all GCC grow an average of maybe, we are talking about some of them. For Oman is 3.4. The same also up and down for other GCC country. But what's the important stage? What's important point to recognize? We are talking about from 1995 to 2020 that those states, they are really investing, I can say wisely, on upgrading their human resource and their infrastructures. And if we will move now to the new stage of the development, it is essential for the GCC country to move to digitalizations and to move to innovations, because honestly, it will be not a choice. It's essential, and that because the last 50 years was required certain talent, certain kind of laborers, who's you can see it in case of Oman and others. Majority of those labor was unskilled and are having what they call it low pay, and that maybe was required in the beginning because we are really building the state. Now by 2020, I strongly believe that we are having a modern countries here in the GCC country, and also, I mean, our what they call it bottleneck, which is oil and gas, having a lot of pressures, and we need to move from what they call it a rentier state to the state where need to be more diversified, where we need to capitalize on what we've been built in terms of infrastructure, what we've been having in terms of natural resources, which we use honestly to export it, majority of it as a crude. Let's say talking here about oil and gas, minerals. So to move, I mean, to the last stage, I mean, here, which is talking when it comes to Oman is 2040 visions. It is digitalization. It is in the heart of it. And it is really, we are having a dedicated program, we call it National Program for Digitalizations, because we strongly believe that, I mean, yes, we do have a good degree of readiness, but that is not sufficient, I mean, really to take us to the where we want to be a state where it can having a diversified economy, having the what they call it, able to compete. So we need to really, instead of using very low skills and educated skills, to move toward automations, to move toward more of digitalizations, and also to connecting the dot using a lot of these features of artificial intelligence and data mining and all these kind of things, which is going to help us to build the new story. So for the GCC, and it's essential, honestly, to move to that stage. If we'll move to the second slide, where we are, I'm trying to say that for Oman and others, the growth is very much linked to the oil price. And that is really leaving our countries under a lot of threat. And you might also agree with me that, I mean, the pandemic and the corona problem is really stopping a lot of what they call it, world supply chain, and a lot of business being stopped, and the demand of oil is really declined sharply. The price it's continuous in their declining, which is from 2014 until today, and that really gave a GCC country a clear lesson that diversification is the way forward. Also, if we look to the improvement in the technology and improving of the efficiency of consuming of the oil and gas, that really give us a clear signal that we are going to move to where we need really to compete internationally. That being said, I'll move now to the third slide. Yes, so this is honestly, this is a problem across GCC country, which is the business cycle. And that is why, because we are still a growing nations, and we can see that the oil and gas was the main, what they call it, drive of those countries. And if you, I'm sure you are familiar with the concept of the business cycle, where we can see it here in Oman and in other GCC country running only in one direction, the direction where export of oil and gas is entering to the government budget, and government budget is really spend it in two ways. Either spend it in making more infrastructures, more capital expenditures, or spend it as a current where to get, I mean, for salaries and for services, and that create the demand, local demand. And the local demand, honestly, for those kind of bridge was fulfilled mainly from outside. I'm talking here about the demand of goods and services. And that is something that need really to be fixed in the GCC country, and that cannot be fixed without really considering changing this business cycle to make it more toward local people. And local people need to have sufficient skill, sufficient ability to enable them to what they call it, move those countries to the new state. As again, I mean, we can, I mean, from Dr. Náder's session, we can see that we having, I mean, a lot of expat other nations, particularly from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And the problem that though they have done good job and they really helped those countries to be built, but now those countries are almost done. So they need a new talent, people who can connect the dot, and people who can really move to the new stage of development, which will be based on the digital era. So moving to the other slide, please, Daniel. Yeah. So this is a few what they call it features of private sector in Oman, and I'll repeat whatever is applied to Oman to some extent apply to other GCC, because we are having similar economy and similar what they call it mix in terms of the social mix and in terms of also source of income. So we are having GCC private sector has a lot of positive component, and we all know that we are having great infrastructures, and we are having also what they call it promotions of entrepreneurship, foreign investment, and try to always clean up the business environment. However, the private sector is, unfortunately, from the business cycle, you will see that it is heavily reliant on the government spending, and government spending, for some reason or another, if oil price going down, the ability of those countries to spend will be less. So private sector is already now under a lot of pressure, and I think that is the current case in most of the GCC country. One of the also problem that also we are having a kind of mismatch between what our university training institute produce and whatever we are having in terms of the job available on GCC. So this is some important area, and that's why, I mean, if you move to the second slide, please. If we really can see also, I mean, that is also something important. I mean, that is still the state is really the main engine of the growth of those country, and it's clear because they are having the deep, what they call it, pocket, and the deep ability to spend, and to recruit people, and to provide free health, free educations, and free training. However, that also ability is under pressure because of the reduce on their what they call it main resource of income, which is oil, and that is where the state and business and society relationship need to be really readdressed, and where there will be more of kind of what they call it cost bearing, I mean, or cost sharing, and there will be introduction. We see almost all GCC introduce some form of taxation, moving some form of subsidies, and they are moving toward more developed, what they call it, countries. So next slide, please. So let's talk about labor market in Oman. Labor market in Oman is really remain destroyed under a lot of what they call it pressure, because I mean, 91% almost from GCC has really 90% of the labor market is really have a low skill, and that is not going to help GCC to compete, to move to the innovation and to compete internationally. That is where we need a policy intervention, clear, essential and important, that to have a policy intervention that can help to tweak this problem in the labor market. Unfortunately, in Oman and other GCC, and I think that mentioned by Dr. Náder, the women participation rate is really slow. It reached up to 7%, and that is really very slow. And we are talking about half of the nation is only contributing by 7%. So this is something will not happen, what they call it, automatically or naturally. It needs to be policy interventions, and there is many report, many what they call it study proof that is need to be done in a very comprehensive way. Moving further, let's be quick, Dane. I mean, we can see that private sector, although contribute heavily, 85% in 2019 in creating the total labor force, but the majority of this labor is expats, not for the GCC country. And this is very important component. GCC having, all the GCC country, including Oman, having a growing nation. We have a lot of young Omanis, a lot of young GCC who's educated, who's now looking for a job. And GCC countries or governments or are already big enough. I mean, the size of the government on Oman or in Saudi or in UAE, they are very fat, and it is not proper to create more job on the government, because that will end up us having too many bodies, too many entities, and that is going really to really take a lot of our financial resources, instead of really spend it in productive sector, will be only going out as a salary and benefit. Also will reduce the ability of those government to have a clear decision making, because, you know, if we are talking about digitalizations, it means not too many bodies, not too many ministry, not too many institutions, because everything need to be automated, everything need to be digitalized. So where is the other source of job creation? It will be definitely in the private sector. However, the private sector has, I mean, we said there is a demand and there is supply skill mismatch on the private sector in the GCC, and GCC, young GCC citizen need really to be taken through a stage where they need really to fulfill the demand available on those economies. So if we move further to next slide, please. We can see that, I mean, after seeing this great progress on a success story for in the GCC country, including Oman, we can see that all these 6 countries are facing similar challenges in terms of diversification, in terms of job creation, and in terms of, I mean, trying to find a source of funding and not relying on oil to fund their development activity. And most important is globalization's trend. I'm talking here about the digital economy, the innovations, the many things is coming up. And if we are not going to run and in a proper speed, and if we are not having a timely interventions of the policy, that is going really to really lead us to a lot of issues. So moving further, I'd like to talk now about the Oman Vision 2040, which is, I mean, Oman Vision 2040 really calling for a paradigm shift. And paradigm shift here, it need to really to look to all elements, talking here about the labor market, about the capital market, about the institutions and government, about also the relation with the rest of the world. It's about all components of the development, which is GCC used to really what they call it, use it in, I mean, or to have it in what they call it in conventional or traditional way. Now with the new visions, I think all GCC are having a transformational visions, and we can see that digital transformations on the heart of it. And I think Saudi Arabia, our big brother, and are really moving in a very good speed on this program. UAE as well, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, and Oman. Honestly, we are having a very well structures in term. We are moving toward e-government. We are moving, and there is a lot. I mean, few buckets here and there, and all these things now being integrated and really moving in a good speed toward that transition. So moving toward, please next slide. This is some statistic. I mean, I will be happy to really share with you the whole vision document about Oman Vision 2040, because I really enjoy being a part of this vision formulations process. I was close to really, and this vision, by the way, it's really done with participations of majority of society. We've been visiting Oman, as you might all know, is a great country, beautiful country with plenty of investment available, and we've been really able to demonstrate to our people and society that we are having a lot of problem, we are having a lot of financial challenges, but we are having also a great opportunity, and we are having a lot of strength and the degree of readiness of Oman. If we really work toward the Vision 2040 is going really to be another and a renewed and success renaissance for the country. And I think you might all aware that we are having a great smooth transition in our political system. I mean, now His Majesty Sultan Haytham, who was the senior chief of the Vision 2040 formulation, and he's aware of all these challenges, and really he's putting national digital transformation program as a priority in the country. And I think a lot of policy being already put in place, and there is money coming in the pipeline. So proceeding further, I don't want to take much because we'd like to leave more time for discussions. This is the national priority. We are having 12 clear national priority, and you can see it. It is touch on labor market restructuring, touch about in terms of the legislations of digitalizations and many things. So proceed, please, with the other slide. So this is the aspect of the paradigm shift. I mentioned the businesses. So that we are not talking about government digitalization. We are talking about business. We are talking about individual, talking about society. And also all these things need really to move toward the digital arena. And I think we are moving, although we are a bit slow, but because of pandemic, but we are progressing. Also factor for production in terms of labor, technology, government, it is also being considered on our digital transformations program. So let me move fast, Daniel, please. So this is the holistic development where we want really move Oman, and I'm sure other GCCs really inspired. And to be honest, I mean, the GCC country has all what it takes, but what they need really to face the reality and really change a lot of what they call it element, including the mindset, and really some old perceptions that we need to rely on foreign labor, we need to rely only on oil, we need to do, and that's all these perceptions need really to be changed. So please move to the next stage. So this is the reason. I think I already covered these presentations, but that's all. We'll be more than happy to share it with you. This is the reason for Oman and other GCC to move from the current stage of development to more diversified economy. We are talking here about youth population aspirations to be part of the nation building, and also because of, as I mentioned, the pressures on the revenue and resources of those countries. So please let us proceed. So reforms of individual mindset, I think I already talked to it because I'm running out of time. I have 3 minutes to finish. So policy reform, and this is an important slide to me, and I think Dr. Náder already touched on it, but this is, I mean, we are trying to work in a paper where we will try to put some policy intervention clearly for GCC country, particularly to Oman, that can help to enhance or to really support either the businesses, either government, even individuals to move toward the new required transformation in terms of the labor market readjustment and the moving toward what they call it digital economy. So please proceed. So in the digital arena, Oman, as I mentioned, I think I already mentioned this information that is already expanded digital and moving forward and becoming becoming a digital state. With the digital business enterprises and with the digital society, and that will enable us to really compete and to build on our strength and really making the best of the human capital as Omani we have, making best of our natural resources in terms of availability of abundant, what they call it, natural resources, what they call it, get use of our location, get use of our beauty of the country, availability of different kind of mining, huge fish, what they call it, resources. All these things need to do things because we are just starting exploring those sectors. We need to do it up to the best, what they call it, technology, up to the best, what they call it, digital information available. So let me now move to my last two slides. So this is, please also you can skip it because this is talking about the fixing about our business cycle, which is I already mentioned it, and what kind of policy tools required, not only physical, not only monitor, not only trade, it's about also digital policy, which is, by the way, it's a new trend. We used to have to hear only about monetary policy, physical policy, trade policy. Now digital policy is coming and it's appearing strongly, and we would really push a lot of interventions in this area. So please move to, so this is our 5 national transformation program. I'll talk only about digital transformation program, which is about moving the nations to be a digital economy, digital society. And there is budget already allocated to move the government to have e-government, and also to help a lot of businesses to upgrade their way of doing business toward achieving the objective of digital transformations. I think this was my last slide, and I'm really happy to be part of this panel. And there is this is some KPIs about the Vision 2040, and you will see that digital transformation is appearing almost everywhere. And although Oman is ranking good on some of like network readiness, but we are inspired to be on the top 10. We are, I mean, there is a lot of work need to be done to achieve such objective, but I think we are into it, and Oman has all what it takes, hopefully. So thank you once again for the invitations, and I hope it was useful.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. One of the things that you both have mentioned is about the necessity to include women in the workforce. And of course, specific policies need to be implemented in order to do that. But in addition to a policy, presumably there would need to be a cultural shift to some degree to normalize the inclusion of women in the workforce. How do you see this? What challenges would you consider there are in regards to such cultural shift?
Can I go ahead?
Please.
Yes, thank you. Excellent question. Many thanks, Daniel. I think what you've touched on is actually a core to looking at reforming some of the issues in labor market. My short answer to your question is that the cultural shift is already happening. It's already taking place, and it took place basically within the region 30 years ago in Iran. When the Iranian women went to work, they went to universities, and they were involved in the activities of the societies partly because of the labor issues during the Iran and Iraq war. I think that set the trend. I mean, we've had these trends in the United Kingdom and in European countries in the Second World War. When you let ladies go into the labor market, they will prove their worth. So looking back at the GCC 6, I mean, Iraq also pretty similar to Iran in terms of the labor and female empowerment. But I think you have an interesting point. It's partly to do with traditional mindset. And my feeling is it's actually through the education. Once our sisters, daughters, mothers, once they move in through the university system, and even happening in Saudi Arabia now in the last 3-4 years, I was working there not so long ago, and to see the transformation in the last 3 years, I think it is taking place. You're absolutely right. I think you're touching on something which is actually to do with mindset and male guardianship mindset, which is also changing as well. And I think within the different countries, there are different segments which are pushing this along. This needs the women themselves to actually push forward, and the men within the families and within their societies to support them. Pass over to you, Dr. Yousuf.
Thank you, and thanks, Daniel. It's a really good questions, and this is an important thing to happen. Honestly, yes, we do have 5 national transformation program, and achieve among them is we call it change management, and this is something to do with the mindset, as Dr. Náder said, mindset, perceptions, and it includes some nudging program. We're trying to really seed some of this new what they call it practice in our schools, in our mosque, in our what they call it university, and try really to send a clear message. And honestly, we already started. I think we also Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all these countries, they start working. And when it comes particularly to women, GCC. It's no shame to say that women always rank better in educations. In the top what they call it 20, always women, and that's good. We're proud of them, and we really now here in Oman and others, they are trying to encourage also distant people working from home, and that is honestly is really helping women to participate, because culture is changing, but changing in a very slow manner. But trying to really give a comfort to the woman to work from her home, or also now to help. Now we are moving toward more productive economy, where women can really produce and supply from home to either to small factories, and that this kind of thing, honestly, you see, internationally, women participation is around 35%, and when it comes to the local labor force, although in GCC, as I mentioned, it is 7%, and that's, by the way, not only for Oman, it's across GCC, and that is mean we are losing a huge strength, a lot of muscles, what they call it, need to be on the gear of really development. And I think our policymaker aware of that, but it is a long journey. It's not going really to be achieved on just by having a nice statement or just a nice, what they call it, advertisement. It will require us, to really spend more and making it what they call it crystal clear in terms of their and I think thing is moving to really include and really give the woman the power and the comfort really to do.
And if I may add, Daniel, this is fascinating in some ways when you look at technology and you look at startups. You look at technology startups in the region, in Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Iran, Kuwait, and you see the leaders, as well as Oman, of course. You see some of the leaders either being women or having young female on their team. It's fascinating to see, for example, how it comes grassroots up. You look at the number of Khaliji girls, Gulf state countries, ladies who play computer games. These numbers are staggering. Computer games is really popular. Likewise, it's picking up in Iran, etc. So I think it's coming up. As Dr. Yousuf mentioned, it will take time, but it's not going to be a trend that is not going to change. It will change, and it will change in due course.
Thank you. Those are very fascinating answers, and it tells us about the current state of affairs in the Gulf state, and it's encouraging to hear that this trend has started, and and of course cultural shifts do take time, but it's very positive to feel that the change has at least started to happen, and that of course should be very helpful towards building stronger economies. I think we have time for one more question. Do you see any intentions at reforming the immigration policies for migrant workers? One of the things that the current pandemic has underscored was the vulnerability of migrant labor population in the Gulf states in terms of a lack of access to adequate healthcare, crowded living conditions, low living wages. In the intention to digitize the economy and overall build a stronger economy, do you think the migrant labor force will be considered in these plans? Do you see any attempts at making any reforms?
Yeah, shall I start now, Doctor? Yeah, to me, this is also another excellent question. And that is adjustment is needed, and it is happening. You can see that all GCC country, particularly here in Oman, it's clear in UAE that they are trying to attract talent, and they are giving sometime even nationality, long residency. Why? Because they I mean, as I tell you, I mean, those countries, they rely on immigrant or for laborers, which is, as I told you, majority of them to 80%, 90% having secondary school and below. So they have done good job for us, and they are really contribute positively to the growth. However, now those states being built, so they are not having the sufficient skills, the sufficient capability to innovate, to compete, to enable to move GCC economy to where they are going into international, what they call it, supply chain, to produce something and being able to compete and come up with a new product and sell it. The current structures of the labor market in the GCC, which is rely mainly on non-educated and low skill, it must be changed. And there is a lot of policy intervention is happening. For us in Oman, more than 300 to 400,000 in the last 1 year moved the country out, because of the corona impact, and because we are moving. I mean, yes, we need more skill, but more skill will be more welcomed. And you know, as we see a lot of competition to attract foreign direct investment and multinational company, similar happening when it comes to the talent and immigrant. I mean, even you see European, they are really make it easy for immigrants coming, for them who are having good education, good certification, and they can add to the mix of the skilled needed.
I think just to add to this, fascinating question. I realize we're running out of time, but just to say these are real issues that need to be tackled. Industrial policy, and also the welfare of the labor. I mean, Dr. Yousuf is absolutely right. Let's be quite open and honest about it. Many of these countries were built on the shoulder of migrant workers, like physically, right? So we have regionally a debt to pay. And that debt is actually not just the salary they get, but an acknowledgement of the right. And I think there's been interesting movements in Qatar about this. But also, as we talked about, lifelong learning has to apply to migrants as well. We should be, and I think there are explorations of the kafala system, guardianship system. Let's give them the opportunity to stay, to move jobs, to update and upgrade. You would much rather, and we would much rather deal with someone who knows the culture, who's been there, who can stay there and who can improve. They can be in the so-called zone of proximal development. So back to your questions, let's learn some of the lessons of other countries of how they deal with migrant labor as citizens and not just as somebody who comes in and leaves in 2 years' time. Fascinating area that is being looked at.
Thank you very much. We ran out of time, but thank you for such excellent presentations about the current state of economic affairs in the Gulf states. I think we all learned a lot about what is going on there. So we will finish this session, and we thank you to both speakers, and we hope we'll see you at the following sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure.